So, we start with Anders project, which is how to set selected rows and update it using the input box. So, we move on to this project and look at how to set selected rows and update it using input box. The first, we start with our public class form one, which is the skeleton we get when we double tap on the form UI, which is the user interface. So from there, we set up our, our data columns and do that manually with no data table to be used, which is in our previous one, we used to define a virtual data table, which is available from data binding with the data grid by with in this we are no more using that approach. We are using a different approach. So manually define our columns using dot add id which is column 1, dot add first name, column 2, dot add last name, and dot add age. So we move on to add some sample rules to it, which is DataGridView dot rules dot add, and uh, we have 4 columns, which is that of ID, name, and last name and age. So we add rules to our table and we inputted some dummy data to help us navigate or understand what we are doing. So here we set the behavior of the selection process. So data grid view dot selection mode equals data grid view selection mode dot full select, which means that the user can select a cell of the row. Maybe the user just select the cell of the ID. Now the user has to select the whole row, all the cells in the row. And data view 1 dot multi select equals false. It means that the user cannot select multiple rows. The user needs to select only one row. So data grid view dot user data grid view 1 dot allow user dot add rows equals false, which means the user cannot add the values manually, but the user needs to select the rows and use the update button to do that. So we move on to defining our button 1 underscore click, and we achieve that by double clicking on our button. So we check if a row is selected. So this if condition, if data grid view 1 dot select rows the count equals 0, then we see those. So please update. So which means if no row is selected, which means the number of rows selected is 0, then an error message should pop up as please select a row to update. So if the user doesn't select a row and tries to update on the cell, this message should pop up to the user so that the user will do the right thing. So we move on to get the selected row. So as the user has selected a row, this then gets the selected row, and this portion, which is dim ID as string, selected row the cell ID value to string, same as the fdim, ldim, and the age. What it does is that if the user selects the row which is being handled by this portion of the code retrieves the data or the values in those cells of the row. So This block of code, which is dim new ID as string, input box, edit ID, update row ID. So these variables and the input box, it is assigned to it. What it does is that if the user selects the row, then this portion retrieves the values or the data in that row. This portion displays that values in the input box. And this portion of code is when the user tries to make an update to the data in the input box. So if the data the user is inputting is not the right data, maybe with the ID, instead of inputting a number, the user inputted maybe letters, an error message will pop. So for the ID and the age, if the user don't input an integer or a floating point number or any figure, a message will pop up. Please provide a valid. This message the box triggers, which says please provide valid input or prompting the user that the data inputted is invalid. So the user will press OK. There will be a portion which is OK for the user to tap on for the message to disappear, for the raw message to disappear. So if everything is all right, this portion of code enables the user to update the rule he or she selected, which is the selected rule or cell's ID. So this one updates the cell, that's what the ID. This one updates the value of the first name, this update the value of the last name, and this update the value of the each column of the cell belonging to the each column. Same applies to all respectively. So now let's take a look at the UI. So now let's demonstrate it. So we demonstrate it. So we've selected our row. Make sure that the row values, the row was selected, not a single cell. So let's put 3. Okay, change it down to E. Okay, so change it to let's say J. Change the H to this change. And we can observe that it has been updated successfully. So that's where we end it. Thank you.